All right, folks, strap yourselves in because today we are diving headfirst into some seriously deep philosophical waters.
That's right, we're going to need our scuba gear for this one.
We're tackling Michel Serres and his work, Hermès II, L'Interférence. It's a tough one, but trust me, the insights are well worth the effort.
Absolutely. We're going to unravel how we even begin to grasp knowledge itself, especially in our modern world where everything is so interconnected.
Exactly. And get ready to have your mind blown because Serres argues that our traditional ways of carving up knowledge, like those rigid hierarchies you find in textbooks.
Yeah, those ones.
Well, he says they're about as outdated as a dial-up modem.
It's true. It's like trying to cram the entire internet with all its links and connections into neatly labeled folders on your computer. It just doesn't work.
He actually uses the analogy of a network, where disciplines are all jumbled up, constantly bumping into each other and sparking new ideas.
Yeah, it's more like a massive highway system with all these on and off ramps constantly moving, not a rigid old tree with branches stuck in one place.
Think about it. How many times have you hit a wall trying to understand something in one field? Maybe the answer is not in that textbook at all, but in something you learned in a totally different class.
It's those aha moments. They really get you going.
And that's where it gets really juicy. Serres has this idea of the insu. It's like this unknown, this mystery right at the heart of knowledge.
But not in a spooky way. More like, imagine you're at the edge of the map and there's this unexplored territory.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Exactly. It's that frontier that keeps us going, keeps us asking questions. He even calls it this black radiation inside an encyclopedia. Like, no matter how much you know, there's always that background hum of information.
Right. So he's saying get comfy with not knowing everything. That's where the real magic happens.
He's got this great line. There is, within this closed space, or within this expanding universe, which is the encyclopedia, a black radiation, to speak figuratively. There is, in this babble of optimal communication, an inextinguishable background noise.
So good. And that constant not knowing, it's what keeps knowledge dynamic, right? Keeps us on our toes.
It's that thrill of discovery, that, whoa, I never thought of it like that before feeling. And that, my friends, is what keeps us coming back for more, keeps that fire of learning alive.
Preach. That insatiable curiosity is something to celebrate. It's what pushes us forward, both personally and as a society.
Okay, so we've got knowledge as this constantly moving network. But hold on tight, because Serres doesn't stop there. He also wants to shake up how we see the object of knowledge itself. What are we actually trying to know?
Right. It's a huge shift. He's saying, look, it's not just about uncovering some kind of ultimate unchanging truth that's just out there floating in the void or something.
You mean it's not like finding the answer in the back of the book?
Exactly. Serres is saying the way we investigate something, the tools we use, the questions we ask, they all actually shape what we eventually learn.
So it's not just passively observing, it's like we're creating understanding in the process of studying.
Yes. And he uses this really interesting example, just a plain old piece of wax. He says, think about how we understand wax. It's gone through different states of knowledge, you could say, throughout history.
Okay, now you've got me curious. Hit me with these wax states of knowledge.
All right, so imagine you're describing a chair, right? You might talk about its height, width, the angle of the back. You're focusing on the measurable stuff.
Right, like a blueprint.
That's kind of like what Serres calls the Cartesian state of knowledge, all about those abstract geometric properties. Less about the actual messy thing we sit on, and more like an idealized version in our heads.
So it's knowledge that's sort of removed from the real-world object.
Yeah, you could say that. Then we move on to what Serres sees as the 19th century view. Now it's all about observable properties, less about the ideal form and more about how the wax melts, its texture, what happens when you touch it, things we can test.
So we're like getting our hands dirty to know the real wax, not just the idea of it.
Exactly. But even then, it's still about us messing with it, right? We're not really listening to the wax itself. It's not until we hit the modern state, what Serres calls the objective, that things get really wild. Now we're recognizing that the wax itself holds information.
Wait, what kind of information can a lump of wax hold?
Well, think about it. The history of how it was formed, maybe traces of the bee that made the honeycomb. We're not just imposing our own understanding anymore. We're tuning into what the object itself tells us.
Whoa, it's like the wax is a book and we're finally learning its language. This is blowing my mind here.
It's amazing, right? And this ties into how much Serres stresses communication. Knowledge isn't just stuck in our heads. It's about how information flows between people, between different fields of study. Heck, even between us and the objects themselves.
So it's less about what we think we know and more about being open to all these different ways of knowing, these channels of communication we might be missing.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
like suddenly we've got these new antennas and there's a whole world of knowledge out there we didn't even know we could tune into.
Okay, so we've got knowledge as this crazy network, objects talking to us. I'm starting to feel like I'm in the Matrix. But Serres gives us a more down-to-earth analogy, too. He talks about highway interchanges.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
What do you think he's going on about there?
Well, think about how annoying a crossroads is, right? You gotta slam on the brakes, pick one direction, hope you don't get stuck in traffic.
Worst feeling, especially when you're not even sure you're going the right way to begin with.
Exactly. But an interchange, with all those ramps and levels, it lets traffic flow smoothly in every direction.
Okay, I'm seeing where you're going with this. So instead of getting stuck in one lane, one field of study, we can kind of zoom around, making connections, exploring all these different avenues.
Exactly. We can follow those threads wherever they lead without hitting a dead end.
Makes you think about the deep dive itself, huh? Like maybe we're building a kind of knowledge interchange here for our listeners.
Oh, like that.
Taking all these big complex ideas and giving everyone a better roadmap to explore them.
Yes. And not just a roadmap to like specific facts, but a whole new way of thinking about knowledge itself.
I'm all about that. Speaking of which, there's this example in the text that really grabbed me. The story of Thales measuring the pyramids.
Classic Thales.
Yeah. But before you think this is just a geometry lesson, Serres uses it to make a much bigger point.
Oh, absolutely. It's not about the math itself.
So what's it about then?
Well, those pyramids, even if nobody planned it that way, they embody this concept of similarity, right? Key idea in geometry.
Okay, so even without some genius architect thinking about it, those pyramids are speaking the language of math just by existing.
That's what Serres is getting at. Objects themselves have this language, this way of holding information. And through science, through careful observation, we learn to decode it.
It's like you were saying before, knowledge isn't trapped in some textbook. It's everywhere, woven into the world, just waiting for us to notice it.
And that's the beauty of it, right? We just have to open our eyes and our minds.
So as we wrap up this wild ride through Sarah's work, let's remember, we're ditching those rigid, outdated ways of thinking about knowledge. It's not a hierarchy, it's a network, constantly growing and changing. And at the heart of it all is this ensue, that exciting unknown that keeps us curious and pushes us to learn more. We even considered that objects themselves hold knowledge, whispering their secrets to those who know how to listen.
It's a pretty amazing way to look at the world, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It reminds us that knowledge isn't something we just absorb. It's something we actively create through our curiosity, our questions, and our willingness to connect the dots, no matter how unexpected they may seem. So, here's something to think about. If objects can really speak, like Serres suggests, what might you discover by paying closer attention to the everyday stuff around you?